Subsequently, archaeologists entered the area, and through the late 70s, they dug and they found over 5,000 fragments.
A team of researchers lowers themselves into a dark limestone cavern in the Caucasus, expecting to find stone tools. Instead, they find a femur the size of a grown man's torso. This is the reality of the Dmanisi region, where reports of a 9-foot-tall race have surfaced, shaking the foundation of anthropology. And get this, these bones don't match anything on the official charts. They predate modern humans, yet they possessed a physical power that is frankly terrifying. The crazy part is that these mountain giants might have been the original masters of Eurasia long before we arrived on the scene. What the cave dwellers left behind. Deep in the rugged terrain of the Caucasus Mountains, specifically near the Dmanisi region of Georgia, something massive has been pulled from the earth. We are talking about skeletal remains that belong to a race of beings standing well over 9 feet tall. For a long time, the world of science has been comfortable with the idea that our ancestors were small, scrappy survivors. But these bones tell a very different story. The bone density alone is staggering. It is much thicker and heavier than anything found in a modern human, suggesting these beings were built for extreme power and survival in a world that was much more dangerous than our own. This discovery has sent shockwaves through the local communities who have lived with these stories for generations. In the villages surrounding these mountains, the elders don't talk about these beings as myths. To them, the giants were a reality. They were a race that lived in the high altitudes, away from the smaller tribes of early humans. And get this, the physical evidence found in these caves suggests they predated modern humans by tens of thousands of years. This isn't just a tall person here and there. This appears to be an entire population that reached heights that shouldn't be biologically possible according to our current understanding of the human frame. Basically, when you look at a 9-foot-tall frame, you have to realize the amount of calories and the sheer biological cost of maintaining that size. These beings weren't just big, they were efficient. The bone structure shows attachment points for muscles that would have given them strength far beyond any athlete today. Imagine a person whose legs are the size of your entire body. That is what was being pulled from the limestone layers of these ancient caves. But here is the catch. Even though these bones exist, you won't find them in many mainstream textbooks. There is a massive gap between what the locals know and what the official record allows. What most people don't realize is that the Caucasus region is one of the most geographically complex places on the planet. It is full of hidden valleys and cave systems that haven't been touched in thousands of years. It is the perfect place for a lost branch of the human family tree to hide. Everyone is obsessed with the idea of finding a missing link, but what if the link wasn't smaller and more primitive? What if it was something much bigger and more advanced in its own way? The bones found here show a level of wear and tear that suggests a very active, predatory lifestyle. They weren't just gathering berries, they were the apex predators of the mountain range. The crazy part is the age of these remains. Some estimates place them long before the rise of our own species. This means that while we were still figuring out basic stone tools, there was a race of giants navigating these peaks. Their skeletons show that they were perfectly adapted to the thin air and the brutal cold of the Caucasus. Their rib cages were massive, allowing for huge lung capacity. This wasn't a fluke of nature, it was a specialized race of beings that ruled the roof of the world for a very long time. Hands down, this is one of the most controversial topics in archaeology today because it challenges the very linear path of evolution we are all taught in school. We like to think we are the pinnacle, the biggest and the best, but these caves suggest we were the small ones once. The sheer scale of the femurs and the thickness of the skulls found in these remote sites suggest that these beings could have looked down on a modern professional basketball player as if they were a child. This leads us to wonder how they lived and what kind of culture they had. If they were that big, their tools must have been massive as well. And that is exactly what some explorers claim to have found. Large, heavy stone implements that no normal human could swing with any effectiveness. These were the hammers and axes of Titans. For starters, the weight of these objects alone is enough to make a modern researcher scratch their head. But as we move deeper into the evidence, the questions only get more intense. The mystery of their disappearance is just as big as their bones. How does a race of 9-foot-tall giants just vanish from the Earth? Some say it was climate change, others suggest they were outcompeted by the more numerous, smaller humans. But there are even wilder theories. Some researchers suggest these giants were part of a global network of advanced beings that existed before the last ice age ended. They believe the Caucasus was just one of their strongholds. The bones remain as a silent witness to a time when giants walked the earth. If you think a 9-foot skeleton is a lot to handle, you aren't ready for what they found buried even deeper in the rock. The deeper you go, the more you realize that these giants might have been building things we can barely understand. When evolution goes big. Now we have to talk about the site that everyone points to when they discuss ancient humans in this region, Dmanisi. This place is world famous because it holds some of the oldest hominid remains ever found outside of Africa. Officially, the scientists say these beings were about 5 feet tall. But here is where it gets interesting. Scattered among the official finds are reports of bones that don't fit the mold. It is not that simple, though. In the world of archaeology, anything that doesn't fit the standard narrative often gets labeled as an anomaly or a medical mystery. But when you have multiple reports of massive bones from different caves across the same mountain range, it stops being an anomaly and starts being a pattern. These bones show a bone density that is frankly off the charts. High bone density is usually a sign of a life of extreme physical stress or a specific evolutionary adaptation to carry massive weight. In the case of the Caucasus giants, it is both. To stand 9 feet tall, your bones have to be thick enough to keep from snapping under your own weight. Yeah, about that, scientists who look at the Dmanisi remains often focus on the small-brained skulls. They are fascinating, sure, but they are only one part of the story. The expansion of this story involves the unclassified remains that are much larger and much more recent. There are reports of skeletons found in the 19th and 20th centuries that were documented by local researchers before being moved to back rooms. These skeletons weren't 5 feet tall, they were towering figures that made the excavators look like toddlers. What most people don't realize is that the Caucasus Mountains have a unique climate and soil composition that can preserve bone for a very long time. The limestone caves act as natural refrigerators. This means that even though some of these giants lived tens of thousands of years ago, their bones are in good enough shape to show us the truth. And get this, some of the wilder theories suggest that these giants weren't just a different species, but a biological experiment. Some researchers point to the extreme variation in the Dmanisi skulls as proof that the genetics of that era were highly unstable or being manipulated. They argue that the 9-foot-tall race was the final form of this genetic lineage, reaching a peak of physical perfection that we can't even dream of today. The teeth found in these massive skulls show a diet that was incredibly varied. They were eating things that required immense jaw strength to process. We are talking about a race that could likely crush bone with their teeth. The crazy part is how the scientific community reacts to this. Most of the time, these finds are ignored because they are too big to be true. It is easier to say it was a misreading than to rewrite the entire history of the human race. But the data from these caves is hard to ignore when you see the measurements. A femur that is over 30 inches long doesn't belong to a 5-foot-tall human. For starters, we have to look at the environment. The Caucasus is a vertical world. To survive there, you need massive strength and the ability to travel long distances over rock and ice. A larger body size provides more surface area for muscle attachment and a larger stride. These giants could probably cover more ground in an hour than a modern human could in 3. They were the masters of the terrain, perfectly evolved for a world of extremes. But here's the deal. While the official record shows us our smaller ancestors, the shadow record tells a story of a lost lineage, a branch of the human family that went toward size and power instead of just brain growth. Some researchers believe these giants were a specific adaptation of an earlier human ancestor that got trapped in the mountains and just kept growing. It's a biological arms race against the environment. And that's putting it lightly. When you consider the sheer amount of food a 9-foot-tall hunter would need, you realize they must have had a very sophisticated way of controlling their territory. They weren't just wandering, they were ruling. There are even whispers of these giants having a knowledge of the stars and the seasons that predated our own calendars. They lived in harmony with the mountain's cycles, using their height to observe the horizon in ways shorter humans couldn't. But as we look at the tools they left behind, we start to see something even more confusing than their size. The stone tools found near the massive bones are not your average arrowheads. The real question is why these tools look like they were made with a precision that defies the Stone Age. Heavy metal of the Stone Age. If you are going to be 9 feet tall and weigh 400 pounds, you can't use the same tools as a regular human. It just doesn't work. The leverage is different, the grip is different, and the force you can apply is on a totally different level. In the caves where these massive bones were discovered, explorers have also reported finding stone tools that are simply too heavy for a normal person to use effectively. We are talking about hand axes that weigh 10 or 15 pounds. For a regular human, that is a workout just to lift. For a giant, it's a precision instrument. It's not that simple, though. Mainstream archaeology often classifies these large stones as ritual objects. But when you look at the wear patterns, you see they were used for chopping, scraping, and hammering. They were tools, and get this, the way these tools are shaped suggests a hand that was much wider and stronger than ours. The grips are thick, designed for a palm that could wrap around a small tree trunk. Basically, we are looking at a culture of giants that had their own technology. It was a technology of scale. They didn't need bows and arrows to hunt. They probably relied on their sheer size and heavy stones to bring down prey. Imagine a 9-foot-tall hunter throwing a 20-pound rock with the speed and accuracy of a baseball pitcher. That is more kinetic energy than a modern bullet. They were the ultimate hunting machines. Everyone's obsessed with the idea that early humans were weak. But these Caucasus finds suggest there was another way, a way of pure, raw, physical dominance. The crazy part is that these tools are often found in the same layers as the bones, proving they belong together. What most people don't realize is that by ignoring the tools, we are ignoring half of the evidence. You can't have a giant without the world the giant built. So, here's the deal. Some of the most extreme theories suggest that these giants weren't just using stone. There are rumors of metal artifacts found in the deepest, unrecorded layers of these caves. Metals that shouldn't have been smelted for another 50,000 years. If true, this means the giants had a grasp of metallurgy that was wiped from history. They were mining the rich veins of the Caucasus Mountains long before the Bronze Age. Hands down, the most impressive artifacts are the large stone mortars used for grinding. These aren't the size of a bowl, they are the size of a bathtub. They suggest a diet that included large amounts of processed plants and grains, meaning these giants were staying in one place long enough to develop a complex food culture. And that is putting it lightly. The more we look at the artifacts, the more we realize these beings weren't just big animals. They had a social structure. They had a way of life that allowed them to survive in the mountains for thousands of years. But here's the catch. The more successful they were, the more they would have clashed with the smaller humans moving into the area. There are theories that the giants actually taught the smaller humans how to survive, acting as the gods or titans of early mythology. This would explain why almost every culture on Earth has stories of giant teachers who brought civilization from the mountains. It's a heavy thought, but it fits the pattern. And as we look at the folklore of the region, the stories start to sound less like fiction and more like a historical report. Local folklore in Georgia is filled with stories of the Devi, a race of giants who lived in the mountains and fought with the early heroes of the land. These aren't just stories, they are the oral history of a conflict between two different types of humans. One was small and numerous, the other was massive and solitary. We see this pattern all over the world, but in the Caucasus, the physical evidence actually backs it up. The question is, did the smaller humans eventually win through numbers, or did something else happen? The folklore says the giants didn't just die, they went into hiding, and some believe they never left. The final stand in the high peaks. To understand the bones in the cave, you have to listen to the people who live in the mountains today. For them, the giants aren't a discovery, they are a memory. In the Caucasus, the legends of the giants are more than just campfire stories. They are detailed accounts of a race that had its own language, its own territory, and its own tragic end. They call them the Devi, and they are described as being over 9 feet tall with incredible strength and a strange, almost magical connection to the mountains themselves. Yeah, about that. Scientists usually dismiss folklore as pure imagination. But think about it. If your ancestors spent thousands of years fighting or avoiding 9-foot-tall titans, wouldn't you tell stories about it? These legends often contain specific details that match the archaeological finds. They talk about the giants living in deep caves using massive stone tools and having a bone-deep fear of the rising sun or changing weather. It's not that simple, though. The stories don't just say the giants died out. They say they were driven deeper into the earth. What most people don't realize is that the Caucasus Mountains are riddled with unexplored cave systems that go down for miles. If a race of giants wanted to disappear, they couldn't have picked a better place. The crazy part is that even in the last 100 years, hunters and explorers in the high altitudes have reported seeing things that don't fit the official wildlife records. Massive footprints and the feeling of being watched by something much larger than a bear. Basically, we are looking at a truth anchor here. The Dmanisi caves are a real place with real unique remains. The legends are a real cultural force. When you put them together, you get a picture of a lost world. These giants were the titans of the old world, the ones who stayed behind while the rest of us moved into the valleys. Hands down, the most chilling part of the folklore is how the giants are said to have protected their tombs. This matches the discovery of the bones in hard-to-reach caves that seem to have been intentionally sealed. These weren't just bodies left to rot, they were burials. There are wild theories that these burial sites are actually markers for something much bigger, underground cities where the giants retreated to escape a global cataclysm. Some researchers believe that the giants knew a massive shift was coming and used their strength to carve out sanctuaries deep within the limestone. So, here's the deal. If these beings were as intelligent as the legends say, why didn't they take over the world? Why are we the ones here talking about them? The answer might lie in their biology. Being 9 feet tall is great for a fight, but it's terrible for a famine. A giant needs a massive amount of food. When the climate changed and the large animals they hunted began to disappear, the giants were the first to feel the hunger. But there is an even darker theory. Some suggest that the smaller humans didn't just outcompete the giants, they hunted them. They used their numbers and their smaller, faster weapons to target the titans in their sleep. It was a war of extinction that lasted centuries. This would explain the deep-seated fear of humans that appears in many giant legends. The giants weren't the monsters. We were. This flips the entire narrative of Jack and the Beanstalk on its head. In the high peaks of the Caucasus, the final stand of the giants might have been a desperate attempt to preserve their race in the only place the smaller humans couldn't easily follow. The question is, what did they leave behind in those final moments to make sure they were never forgotten? What we are still missing. So here we are at the end of the trail. We have the bones, we have the tools, and we have the legends. But the biggest question remains, where did the bones go? It is a common theme that repeats like a broken record across the historical timeline. Someone finds a 9-foot skeleton in a remote cave, the local papers report it with frantic headlines, a few scientists from the big city universities come to take a look, and then, poof. The remains are whisked away, sent to a museum basement or a research facility somewhere in the West, and they are never seen again. The crazy part is that this hasn't happened just once or twice. It has happened dozens of times in the Caucasus over the last 2 centuries. We are talking about documented finds in the 19th century during the Soviet era and even into the modern age. What most people don't realize is that history is often written by the winners. And in the world of academia, the winners are the ones who fit the standard model of evolution. A race of 9-foot-tall giants doesn't just nudge the model, it breaks it. It shatters the linear progression we've been taught since grade school. So rather than rewriting the textbooks, it's easier to just ignore the evidence. It's easier to let the bones gather dust in an uncatalogued crate than to admit we might have been sharing the planet with titans. But the truth is, these bones show us that our past is much more crowded than we think. We weren't the only ones trying to survive on this planet. We were just the ones who survived the longest, or perhaps the ones who were the best at erasing the competition. When you look at the sheer volume of lost finds, you start to see a pattern of institutional inertia. It's not always a grand conspiracy, sometimes it's just the fear of being wrong. If you've spent 40 years building a career on a specific timeline of human migration, the last thing you want is a femur the size of a tree trunk showing up in Georgia to prove you wrong. As we move into 2025, however, the wall of silence is starting to crack. New technology like ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and advanced DNA sequencing is making it harder to hide the truth. Researchers are going back to these caves with fresh eyes and equipment that can see through solid rock. They are finding that the unclassified bones, the ones that didn't quite make it into the official journals, have DNA that is unlike anything else on record. It is human-like, certainly, but it possesses a genetic signature that deviates from the known path. This isn't just a minor mutation, it's a signature of a lost branch of humanity that grew to impossible heights in the isolation of the mountains. Some of the most out-there theories suggest that this DNA isn't even from this Earth, or that it was the result of high-level genetic engineering from a civilization that existed long before our recorded history began. Think about that for a second. We think of ancient humans as primitive, struggling to light fires. But what if these giants were the result of a biological mastery we are only now beginning to understand? These giants might have been the protectors, the guardians of a world that was far more advanced than we give it credit for. In the local folklore of the Caucasus, specifically the Nart sagas, these beings aren't just monsters, they are builders, warriors, and keepers of ancient wisdom. They were said to have moved stones that no modern crane could lift and to have known the secrets of the stars. Basically, the Caucasus giants represent the great what-if of our history. What if we hadn't been the ones to inherit the Earth? What if these titans had found a way to survive the changing climate or the prehistoric cataclysms that wiped out their cities? The world would be a very different place today. Our architecture, our religions, our very concept of human would be built on a larger scale. But instead, they are just shadows in the rock, bone fragments in the dust of a limestone cave. And that is putting it lightly. We are literally walking over the graves of a lost civilization every time we hike these peaks. The Caucasus is one of the most rugged vertical landscapes on the planet. It is a labyrinth of caves and hidden valleys. So the thing is, are we missing a key detail? Are we so focused on the small bones at Dmanisi, the famous early human site, that we are ignoring the giants standing right behind them? It feels like we are on the verge of a massive revelation. The evidence is piling up in private collections and forgotten archives, and sooner or later, the official record is going to have to change. There are even whispers, reports of living giants in the most remote vertical corners of the mountain range. These are the places where the terrain is so treacherous that no human has set foot there in 1,000 years. While most dismiss this as pure fantasy or the product of mountain-induced hallucinations, the sheer size of the cave systems makes it theoretically possible for a small population to survive. If you have a massive underground aquifer and a cave system that runs for miles, you don't need to come to the surface. You can stay hidden away from the prying eyes of modern technology, satellites, and hikers. Hands down, the most important thing we can do is keep asking the questions that no one wants to answer. Because the truth isn't just in the books, it's in the earth waiting to be found. What else is hiding in those mountains? What other races have we forgotten in our rush to claim the title of sole survivors? The more we look, the more we realize we are just getting started. We have to face the fact that giants were real, they were powerful, and they were here long before us. They weren't just a myth to scare children, they were a biological reality that flourished in the thin air of the high peaks. The mountain titans might be gone from our sight, but their legacy is carved into the very stone of the Caucasus. It's in the cyclopean masonry of the old ruins and the strange oversized megaliths that dot the landscape. It is a permanent reminder that the world was once a place of giants, and we are merely the stewards of the ruins they left behind. The question isn't whether they existed anymore, the question is, why are we so afraid to admit it? As 2025 unfolds, the mountains are starting to give up their secrets. Whether it's through a random landslide exposing a hidden tomb or a rogue scientist leaking DNA results, the truth is coming for the history books. And when it arrives, we'll have to rethink everything we thought we knew about where we came from. Does the existence of 9-foot-tall giants change how you look at our own history? Are these bones the ultimate proof that we aren't the first masters of this planet? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want more deep dives into the world's greatest mysteries, make sure to like and subscribe for more.